Hello and welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. As Washington searches for a path towards negotiations, Moscow is issuing new threats against Kyiv. Following a phone call between Marco Rubio and Sergei Lavrov, Russia announced plans for what it described as systemic strikes on the Ukrainian capital, prompting sharp reactions from Kyiv and Brussels. Meanwhile, Czech President Petr Pavel said that half of the countries participating in the ammunition initiative launched by his country have dropped out. Joining us today on TVP World to assess the diplomatic and military implications of these developments is Milan Lelich, political analyst with RBC-Ukraine. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So there's actually a lot of information surfacing in the past couple of days, and I'm hoping to get your opinion and your analysis on what that means for Ukraine, be it diplomatically and militarily. One of the most recent one is actually, according to a source obtained by TVP World, saying that there's actually worries about U.S. pulling further deep strike capabilities. They're saying that U.S. plans to have its deep strike capability in Europe, including aircraft carriers and warplanes. How do you think that might impact NATO, Europe's defense capability, and how does that affect Ukraine as a whole?
Well, if this really comes true, then it absolutely falls in line with the general attitude, general policy by Donald Trump's administration to shift away their capabilities from Europe, to put all the burden of Europe's defense on Europe itself, as they say that Europe is never doing enough, and so on and so on. We remember a very, very recent and perhaps even ongoing story about the troops removal from Germany, or troops not coming to Poland, and then Donald Trump said that they will come to Poland and all this stuff. So, but we'll see if it all comes true, because the story with these troops to Poland, it shows that perhaps there was even a communication breakdown between the White House and the Pentagon, and no wonder that under current administration such communication breakdowns are technically possible. Okay, so we'll see how, if and when and how this information really comes to practice, if it does. But yeah, generally it shows that Donald Trump has absolutely no interest in protecting Europe by American troops, because he has some troubles here and there. The situation in the Middle East around Iran is not yet solved, despite all his claims that the peace is coming and all this stuff. It's not yet there. Then we have Cuba issue and perhaps something else here and there. So yeah, it will be very good news for Russian Federation, obviously, because really long-range capabilities are really a deterrence measure, first and foremost. So Russia knows that the Americans are there. So in case Russia does something big against, for example, Baltic nations, against Poland, against Sweden or Finland, for example, that the response will be harsh. Now, everyone understands that Europe, even with all the efforts and commitments and everything, that Europe will not be able to equally replace the American capabilities, just technically unable, and moreover will be unable to do it quickly as needed. So obviously, again, if this all comes true, if Donald Trump doesn't change his mind, which he always can, it will be a bad news for Europe. Obviously, not a good news for Ukraine, perhaps a bad news for Ukraine, and also a very good news for Russian Federation, unfortunately.
All right. And tying that to the diplomatic efforts launched by the Washington administration, Rubio and Lavrov has recently had a phone call. But this brings us to the question of what sort of leverage the United States still have with the fragmentation of NATO. And like you mentioned previously about U.S. being distracted in the Middle East, as well as the situation in Cuba as well. Now there's also talking about, well, scaling back of U.S. presence in Europe. Are they kind of losing their cards to play against Russia?
Well, Donald Trump always brags that he has all the cards in the world to play, but basically we see it specifically on the Russia-Ukrainian war, that Donald Trump basically does not have a lot of means of influence to really make Russia change their behavior, to stop their aggression against Ukraine. Now we are in the beginning, perhaps, of another round of talks or whatever, because different sources here and there, for example, my sources here in Ukraine, say that yes, it may be somehow possible. Also, President Zelensky said it almost publicly, meeting with the MPs from his Sluha Naroda faction the day before yesterday. He said that we are maybe in the last rounds of this fight, because something may be done till November, because in November there will be midterm elections in the United States, and the Republican Party is on the brink of losing at least one chamber of Congress, perhaps both chambers, so something needs to be done. But again, there is a very obvious question: what can be done by the United States to persuade, or to make Russia stop their aggression? So what are the cards? We see that different, like, word games, they don't play, different oral vocals threats, they simply don't work with Russia. So some serious, I don't know, sanction action needed, some kinetic action needed, whatever. But I'm really doubtful if the current administration really does have these cards and these means, and also all these steps that you mentioned, whether the troops withdrawal from Europe and capabilities withdrawal from Europe, and all these extremely skeptical rhetoric about NATO and commitments inside NATO. It all doesn't make Trump's position and U.S. position stronger, obviously.
Right. And speaking of threats, of course, Russia have been issuing their own as well. Most recently, Sergei Lavrov openly warned of systematic strikes on Kyiv and also advised foreign diplomats to leave the city. Is this primarily a military threat, or is it some sort of psychological operation or a message aimed at the West?
I think it's more a psychological threat, surely, against us and against Europe. I think the number one reason is that Russians also do not have that many cards, basically, because they can do nothing at the front line. We see that, and Ukraine is even seizing the initiative here and there. So really, the course of war is very extremely slowly but tilting in our favor, which is good news. We see that the Russians are absolutely unable to do something with our long-range strikes, because different oil refineries and other military or strategic objects, they're set on fire and destroyed here and there in thousands of kilometers from the border, from the front line. They are also unable to do something with our middle strikes, which is more important in the particularly in the military dimension of the conflict. I mean, like 100 kilometers beyond the front line, 80 kilometers, 120 kilometers, because all the logistics in the modern day war, it is done there. And we see that nowadays Ukrainian armed forces are able not to surely control the situation in 100 kilometers beyond the front line, but to reach absolutely every target, to destroy any warehouse or whatever, basically. Which and the Russians understand that without this logistics, they will be technically unable to push forward, because in modern day warfare, again, the logistics decides everything. And if we destroy this logistics as efficiently as we do with the oil refineries, ports, and whatever, it means that they cannot hope to, for example, to capture the entire territory of Ukrainian Donbass. It means it provokes them to make these maybe chaotic or semi-chaotic moves, like threatening Ukrainians, threatening Western diplomats, calling U.S. Secretary of State Rubio to also, to warn him or whatever, to make some psychological effect. I don't know what was the idea behind that call, but it shows that Russia really is running out of cards as well.
Right, definitely a lot of desperation move there. Now, last but not least, I'm also thinking about touching on the Czech-led ammunition initiative, because recently, according to the Czech president, Petr Pavel, 9 out of the 18 countries that participated in this initiative have already dropped out. This is a very, of course, important initiative that supplies Ukraine with large caliber ammunition, 1 million rounds just in the year 2026. How significant is the fact that half the countries are now non-participating?
Well, I think it all depends on the amount of the participation and commitments that the countries that are left, that they will provide to Ukraine. Either they can cover these losses of another partners or not. I think we should crunch the numbers and see the figures. Yes, surely nowadays it may not be as painful as it could be, for example, if it happened a year or a couple of years ago, because at that time artillery and shells played a way bigger role than nowadays. Now, number one weaponry on the front line are drones of all sorts. Everyone knows that. But still, artillery does play its role. We cannot completely say that, okay, artillery is not there anymore. It's something outdated. No, it is not outdated. So it is important. But I think that more or less we'll manage to deal with this problem, either to increase our production or find different sources.
All right, so we'll have to see how that develops. But in the meantime, thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.